Hourly segment is brought to you by the Money Hour radio show, Saturday afternoons at 3 on AM 560, The Answer. Brought to you by Pearshell Financial Group.
You want more than just the headlines? Find out what's going on and what it means with me, Dennis Prager, this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. How about this story coming to us from Pelosiville? Dozens of female employees accuse Google of gender discrimination. Oh, boy. I mean, I understand that Sergey and Larry want to serve the left. They're men of the left. And Eric Schmidt and Al Gore, who they made a cajillionaire through his time on the board and associated stock options. I know they are men of the left. I want to serve the left. And that's why they were happy to slit James Damore's throat as a tribute to cultural Marxists inside of Google and outside. But they learned the hard way that you still got to pay off the trial lawyers. 70 female Google employees called a local civil rights attorney, James Feinberg.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Gloria Allred.
When he publicly queried whether anybody there thought they were getting paid less than their male coworkers. Hey, anybody think they're not making what they should be making? Yeah, I do. All right, call me. We're going to file suit.
Come on over.
Yeah, of course. That's how they do it.
Did he get enough for a class action lawsuit?
Civil rights.
So wait,
attorneys.
But legally, he can't reach out to the client, or can he, and say, hey, do you think you're getting paid less?
It's advertising.
Okay.
In my experience as Mr. Feinberg, having 70 people call you when you put up a post about a company is a very loud outpouring of dissatisfaction. So I think it's a telling matter of concern. Well, how could this be? I mean, where's their diversity commissar to tell us that this just can't be the case? Well, Google did fire back saying that our annual analysis shows no gender pay gap at Google, but that's not enough to be insulated from stick-up jobs from your erstwhile ideological allies, Larry and Sergey. Hate to break it to you. For more on the topic of Google, and by the way, I want to get to Elon Musk, too. What happened when Elon Musk's personal assistant asked for a raise and he couldn't get U.S. taxpayers to subsidize it? Well, we'll get to that. But now we're pleased to be joined by our friend Michael Barone, of course, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner, who has an interesting piece on the topic. Google's tolerance requires repression. That's used to be an oxymoron. Apparently, it's not anymore. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, nice to be with you. Well, I was thinking of entitling that piece, George Orwell, Call Your Office.
Yeah, well, exactly. If only he could.
You got some business here, right?
Well, so a lot of people of the left got a lot of op-ed writers weighing in on this and suggesting that the fact that 80% of computer science majors, for example, are men, is not evidence of anything genetic. It's not evidence of anything that exhibits differences between men and women and the choices they make and the basis for these choices, despite all the science and all the citations that were included in James Damore's 10-page argument.
Yeah.
None of that is relevant, and anybody that suggests such a thing is wrong, and therefore Google was right to file James Damore because he is not part of trying to create the safe space inside that corporate culture that Google wants created.
Yeah, free speech means you get fired for saying what you believe. That's Google's answer to George Orwell. I mean, it's what Google seems to be trying to defend here is a dogma, which ironically is used by various people, like the employees you mentioned, like government agencies, to sue Google. The sort of quasi-religious dogma that in a fair society, every occupational group would represent the same exact gender balance and ethnic proportions of the larger society. They'd all be, 52% women, 48% men, 12% black, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, the fact is that's really not true. And we all know that it's not true for a whole variety of reasons. But the dogma insists that the only reason that you could see a divergence from those numbers is evil, oppression, and discrimination, and the patriarchy working against you. And you see all the arguments spun out. The trial lawyers that you mentioned are very good at spinning out these arguments. They've probably got them on, autopilot in their computer systems. They can make a lot of money from it. But the fact is that it's really a bogus argument. And one of the things that you find out when you research this is that neuroscientists, hard science psychology people who are actually doing hard science, and we're all supposed to believe in science, right? The people that are really doing the hard science say, well, in fact, there are differences in the way that men's brains on average and women's brains on average have developed, and you get different distributions and somewhat different behaviors from that.
Well, in point of fact, in point of fact, James Damore, the response so far from behavioral psychologists and academics, as well as evolutionary biologists, is that Damore got the science right in his piece.
Yeah, he got the science basically right in that speech, and the reference to it, I quoted a Canadian neuroscientist, Deborah So, based in Toronto, who had a piece in the Toronto Globe and Mail and said exactly that as well. And, if you believe in evolution, and remember, you've got all these members of the press going around asking Republican politicians if they believe in evolution. Well, if you believe in evolution, you can easily see why evolution might have caused men and women to have some
evolve differently
characteristics in various ways. Why women might tend to be more nurturing and tend to like working with people better, and that men might tend to be more aggressive and like working with things better.
I think you're describing Dan and I perfectly.
Right, I'm the nurturing one who likes to work with people.
I'm the nurturing one, and we're
the outliers.
Yeah, exactly. So as a female, as a woman, I was not offended by this article at all. But with with freedom of speech comes great responsibility. If they had a code of conduct at Google, do you see at all why he was fired?
Well, the fact is that he violated this quasi-religious dogma, and you get the nonsensical statement from the CEO of Google, who I'm sure is a very smart person and knows this isn't true, that says that James Damore's memo says that our women employees at Google are biologically unfit for that. It says no such thing.
Correct.
It says women on average tend to have certain characteristics. Men on average tend to have certain characteristics. And Damore makes the point that I would make, and that I believe that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 makes, which is judge individuals as individuals. You may be a woman with Middle Eastern ancestry, but you don't necessarily partake of the characteristics that, on average, people who are women of Middle East ancestry partake of. Judge that individual. Give them a chance. Seek out people that may come from unlikely backgrounds to make sure that you're giving a chance to everyone. But don't characterize people by, don't say that they're groups exactly. That was intellectual dishonesty. That was lack of intellectual integrity by the CEO of Google, who says, we believe in free speech, but you're fired.
Well, and also, it's even worse than that. It's even worse than their hypocrisy in terms of what they say they believe versus how they behave when that belief is tested. It's also the need, as you're describing, to mischaracterize and in some cases make up things that he didn't say that are 180 degrees from what he did say. In point of fact, he said, the engineers, the software developers at Google the females are no different than the males in terms of competence. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about the distribution and the population writ large, and this question about, why it's essentially 80% men and 20% women. There's other things. He even went to make on suggestions that Google and others could employ in the high-tech space that may make it more attractive for females to want to apply for these positions and hold these positions, like testing your capacity for teamwork in the interviewing process rather than making the interview process solely about your individual work product. But they don't do that. So he's making suggestions in advance of the female perspective based on the science that he's trying to distill because he's an intellectually curious guy. And for that, he's, vilified.
You're out on the street. Well, I'll tell you the interesting factor. 80% of the coders at Google are men. 80% of graduates in recent years of veterinary schools are women. Now, if Google, Google's got a lot of cash sitting around. If they really wanted to get their numbers right, 50-50 men and women, or 52-48, whatever the number they're seeking, all they need to do is buy up all the veterinary hospitals in the United States. I'm sure they got enough money to do that, and their numbers are going to be all right. We don't have a great problem as a society saying, geez, are males being excluded from the veterinary profession? It's a profession that pays well, serves a positive function in society, contributes to our society in ways that are good, and not that many men seem to go into it. Is that a huge problem for the society? Well, maybe those women that are going to veterinary school, rather than becoming computer coders, are following their star to achieve maximum contribution to society in a way that suits their interests, where they can feel they can make a positive contribution. And, oh, by the way, nationally, veterinarians make more money than computer coders.
He is Michael Barone, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com. Michael, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.